Welcome to another edition of Black Men Screaming. My name is Maurice Carver, Executive Director of Stride Incorporated and host of your show. And we are coming to you from the Brooklyn Bridge to the San Francisco Gate Bridge. And joining us, let me tell you something, there's very few people that I have met recently that have put a joy in my heart to actually have a conversation with and know that I have another brother from another mother. And this is a great, brilliant, gifted, talented young man, and his name is David Heredia. And he has a company called Heroes of Color. And we want to welcome David to Black Men Screaming. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. Thanks again for having me. And, it's an honor for me to be able to share my my creativity and just my voice with you. So thanks again.
Well, your creativity is such an excellent thing to look at. It's and not just your creativity, but your wisdom and that you can provide to people during this time that we're going through this Corona experience. And one of the things I want to talk about is that you have a book that's out. It's called The Freelance Hustle.
Yes.
And it talks about making a living as a freelancer is a dream shared by many artists. But this book is here to help cultivate and express your vision and your experience through the time that you went through to become the great person that you are right now. So let's talk a little bit about that, your book, and then also about your podcast.
Okay. So the Freelance Hustle, as you mentioned, was a culmination of, the 20 years plus that I've been freelancing. And, one of the things that I have consistently noticed in several different colleges and universities, and just even amongst my colleagues who are artists, there seems to be a big gap in their knowledge of the business of art. And I always wondered, why is it that, colleges and universities spend so much money to get the top equipment and, all of the latest technologies so that you can create some work. And they pretty much just set you up so that you can work for somebody else. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but my issue has always been, even if you do go to work for somebody else, you still need to be able to negotiate certain terms. You still need to be able to understand what your rights are. And a lot of these things are not really forced upon art students. The business side of it seems to be like you learn as you go if you get that opportunity to do so. But in the process, man, you can end up blowing some really good opportunities. And what happened to me, and there are some stories in the book where I got screwed really bad on contracts, like consistently back to back. And, none of the colleagues that I was running with, they really didn't have a lot of experience with that. So I learned a lot just through trial and error. And so this book was a way to not just provide some great tips and some foresight, but also to give you some ideas of what not to do. So it was a great project. I really enjoyed working on this book, and several people who have purchased the book have already reached out to me, thanking me for, little gems that were dropped, throughout the book. And, man, my objective, I have several different objectives, but one of them is to help freelance artists, because it's a grimy industry, and it's a very difficult one. And the hardest thing, I think, is just being able to separate the artist from the business person. Usually we're just one of the two, and rarely are we both. So this is my attempt to try to introduce the entrepreneurial side of it, because it is so important for an artist, for anybody who is self-employed, to really understand the business side of it. And even if they're just figuring it out and they're making mistakes, that's all right. That's all right, because they're making the attempts to learn more. My bookshelf is full of books on business. Certain times I'll read these books and it just goes over my head. Like, I don't get half of the concepts that they're talking about. But what you do is you take what applies to you. Whatever works for you, you try that out. You know what I mean? And it's really about discovering what opportunities you can create for yourself, and then use whatever business knowledge you have to protect you, because ultimately for creative people, you want to be able to protect your work, copyrights and all that. And so I get into it a little bit with copyrights. I don't get into it too heavily, but actually my script editor the Freelance Hustle, he actually was a lawyer. So he helped me with that section in the book. But yeah, so the Freelance Hustle is absolutely, it was a pleasure to work on that project, and just to see, more than anything, the impact that the words in that book has on, different freelance artists. So
And the
yeah,
thing that's so great about the book also is that I think that the idea of giving back and being proactive and helping people to understand
oh
the
yeah,
business aspect of it spawned your web based webinar, which is
oh, the
how
website,
right
yeah,
which I think is named How the Coronavirus is Changing How I Do
how I
Business
do
or something like that.
business. Yeah, yeah. So that was a week long webinar series that I did, where I conducted interviews with, some of the top leading, freelancers and small businesses across different industries. And, we had consultants, we had writers, we had journalists, we had DJs. Obviously I had an artist in there as well, painter, illustrator. And it was an amazing experience, and while on the surface, it's like, wow, that's great. You're doing this to give back to the community, to help out the freelance artists. That's true. But that was not the reason why I started doing those interviews. Let me tell you the truth. The reason why I started those interviews is because personally, my business got hit hard. I mean, I got slammed. I lost thousands of dollars, because it's crazy how things work out, man. But this year, I had made a decision that I was going to focus 100% on doing speaking events, doing workshops at universities and colleges, pushing this book, going on book tours. So I have the Freelance Hustle that's self-published, and then I have the Scholastic book, which is Little Heroes of Color. So when the year started, January and February, I was going on book tours. I was doing speaking events, doing workshops in Texas. I had 2 in New York. I had 1 scheduled in North Carolina. I had another in Seattle. I had 2 in Boston. And March happened and everything got canceled. So I had planned, I had lined up at least 7 different gigs that were supposed to bring in at least $15,000. Totally gone. So, I'm human. So I was feeling down, man. I was like, how am I going to get out of this situation? And I know I'm not the only one that's going through it, but a lot of times when you're actually in the thick of it, it's hard to see that other people are experiencing the same thing, And so this is
Yes.
one of the topics in the book, is the importance of networking. It's so important. And it's not just networking so that you can get the next gig. Sometimes it's just networking because you need to have that support. You need that support system.
Right.
So all of these people that I had interviewed, with the exception of one, I knew at some capacity I had either done business with them, or I followed them and admired them for whatever reasons. But there was some sort of connection. So I reached out to them. I actually reached out to one, spoke to him over the phone. I didn't interview him on Zoom. This was a phone conversation. And Maurice, man, it lit me up. And I was like, wow, this is great. Not to hear that somebody else is struggling like me, but to hear that this person is overcoming these struggles because they're willing to try these new things. And they're not sure if it's going to work, but they're willing to give it a shot. So that lit something inside me, and that made me feel like, you know what? If I speak to more professionals, I might get more insight, more wisdom, and more ideas on how I can create a new marketing strategy for myself. And at the same time, that's when I started to think, with the hat of an educator, wow, this is some great content that I can share with the community. So that's really what got the whole series started.